I didn't expect anything unusual that day. It was just a quick trip to the pharmacy. The sun was low, painting the street in long golden lines as I made my way to the store I'd been loyal to for years. I knew the aisles like the back of my hand, and with the discount tied to my medical plan, it always felt like a small comfort. I liked those little routines, the things in life that stayed predictable. All I needed was something for my sore throat and pounding head. Nothing more. At least, that's what I believed. The moment I stepped inside, that familiar smell of antiseptic wrapped around me. I moved slowly through the aisles, taking my time even though I felt weak. My eyes landed on the box of cold medicine, and I grabbed it, already picturing myself curled up with tea and a blanket. The hum of the fluorescent lights was steady overhead, almost too steady, like it was warning me of something I couldn't yet name. Still, I told myself it was just another ordinary errand. That's what made what came next feel so jarring. At the counter, I placed the box down, expecting nothing but routine. The cashier smiled, scanned it, and I reached for my card, ready for the discount to kick in as it always did. But instead, her voice, kind, polite, almost apologetic, broke through. "I'm sorry, but you've already used all your discount credits this month." For a second, I just froze. My fingers hovered in the air. My heart gave a strange, heavy thump. How could that be? I hadn't set foot in here once this month. At first, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she meant something else, or maybe it was just a glitch in their system. But her tone was firm, steady, the kind of voice that carried no room for mistakes. I managed a polite smile, though inside, a knot was forming in my stomach. "There must be some confusion," I said, my voice softer than I intended. My hand tightened around my purse strap as if holding on to it could steady me. After all, mistakes happen, don't they? She tilted her head, sympathetic but unwavering, and offered to print the receipt history for the month. I nodded, even though I wasn't sure why. My mind scrambled, searching for an explanation. Maybe Daniel had stopped by. He sometimes picked things up when I wasn't feeling well. That would explain it. I told myself not to overthink, not to read into something so small. Yet beneath that surface logic, unease prickled at me, sharp as a pin against my skin. As she turned to the printer, I glanced around the store. People came and went, bags rustling, conversations quiet and ordinary. It felt almost surreal that the world was moving so normally while something inside me had already shifted. My throat was tight, but not from the cold anymore. I tapped my fingers against the counter, waiting for that piece of paper, unaware that what was about to land in my hands would change everything I thought I knew. The printer whirred softly, spitting out a strip of paper that looked so ordinary, yet I felt my chest tighten as if it were a sealed letter I wasn't ready to open. The cashier handed it to me with a smile, oblivious to the way my fingers trembled as I reached for it. I held the slip between my hands, feeling the faint warmth from the machine. It was strange how something so small could suddenly feel so heavy. I hadn't even read a word yet, but I knew, deep down, I was about to see something I didn't want to. For a moment, I just stood there, staring at the neat lines of black ink marching across the white paper. Cold medicine, painkillers, vitamins. Everything looked harmless, just the kind of things anyone might need on an ordinary day. Relief flickered through me, like a candle catching flame. Of course, it was nothing. Just Daniel being thoughtful, making sure we had what we needed at home. I even felt the corners of my mouth lift into a small, shaky smile. But then my eyes drifted lower. And that's when my breath caught, sticking in my throat like ice. One item, sitting at the very bottom, made the blood rush to my ears. Pregnancy test kit. My vision blurred for a second, my fingers gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled against my palm. A rush of heat spread through me, followed by a cold that seeped into my bones. I couldn't move, couldn't blink. Right there, in the middle of a busy pharmacy, I felt my world tilt off its axis, and I knew, without question, that nothing in my life would ever be the same. I must have read that line 10 times, each word cutting deeper than the last. A pregnancy test kit. My chest tightened as though someone had placed a heavy stone there, pressing down until I could hardly breathe. The irony was cruel, almost mocking. I couldn't have children. Not after the surgery that had taken away that possibility years ago. I'd made peace with it, or at least I thought I had. But seeing it there, on that receipt, was like reopening a scar that had never fully healed. I could hear the cashier's voice asking if I needed a bag, but her words barely registered. The paper in my hand burned like evidence, like a secret that wasn't mine to carry. My thoughts raced to Daniel. He must have been the one. Who else could use my account? My throat tightened, a bitter taste creeping up as denial wrestled with suspicion. For a fleeting second, I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it as some clerical error. But my gut whispered otherwise, low and steady. You already know the truth. Clutching the receipt, I stepped out of the store, the air outside suddenly sharp and cold against my face. The street looked the same, people moving, cars passing, but I felt as if I'd slipped into another reality entirely. A place where the man I trusted most was a stranger. My fingers shook as I tucked the paper into my purse, as if hiding it could dull its power. But it was too late. That small strip of ink and numbers had already rewritten the story of my life. And deep inside, I knew the next page wouldn't be easy to turn. I walked slowly, almost dragging my feet, as if my body needed time to process what my mind already knew. Every step felt heavier than the last. I replayed memories of Daniel in my head, his easy smiles, his excuses for late nights, the way he'd brush off my questions with a kiss on the forehead. Things I once accepted without hesitation, now replayed like flashing warning signs I'd ignored. I hated myself for not seeing it sooner, for trusting so blindly. But trust, I realized, had always been my weakness. At the corner, I stopped and pulled the receipt out again, smoothing the crumpled edges with trembling hands. The list of items mocked me, each line a reminder of what was normal until the last one shattered everything. Cold medicine, painkillers, vitamins, and then that test, sitting there like a cruel punchline to a joke I never agreed to. My stomach churned, a wave of nausea rising. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about my body, my reality, the one thing I could never give him, and apparently, he'd found someone who could. I leaned against a brick wall, my forehead pressed to the cool surface, as if it could steady the chaos inside me. People passed by, glancing briefly, but no one stopped. To them, I was just another woman catching her breath. If only they knew. Inside, my world was cracking open. The life I had carefully built now littered with questions I didn't want answered. Yet one thing pulsed louder than my fear or heartbreak. Rage. Quiet. Simmering. Dangerous rage. And I could feel it growing, waiting to take shape. I shoved the receipt back into my purse, but it felt like carrying a live wire against my skin. Every time I thought about it, my chest tightened, my pulse racing in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, tried to tell myself I was imagining the worst. But deep down, the truth had already settled inside me like a stone at the bottom of a river. Daniel had betrayed me, and no excuse, no desperate story could erase the ink that proved it. I thought about our marriage, the anniversaries, the nights we laughed over dinner, the promises whispered in the dark. Were they all lies, or had he only recently become someone else? The questions spiraled, gnawing at me, but the answers didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that line on the receipt, a silent witness to his deceit. It was proof. It was power. And though I felt my heart breaking, another part of me, the part that had endured loss and pain before, was beginning to awaken. By the time I reached home, the decision had already started forming in the quiet corners of my mind. I wouldn't storm in screaming or collapse in tears. That wasn't me. Not anymore. No, I would hold this paper like a weapon, sharp and ready. If he thought he could play me for a fool, he was about to learn just how wrong he was. I tightened my grip on my purse strap, a strange calm settling over me. Because this wasn't just betrayal, it was the beginning of something far more dangerous. When I stepped through the front door, the house looked exactly the same. The photos on the wall smiled back at me, the smell of dinner still faint in the air, and Daniel's jacket was tossed carelessly over the chair, just like always. To anyone else, it was a picture of normalcy. But to me, everything felt poisoned, touched by a lie I couldn't unsee. My fingers brushed the receipt in my purse, a reminder that the truth was no longer hidden. It was right there, folded, waiting for me to decide what came next. Daniel's voice floated from the living room, casual, warm, the same tone that once made me feel safe. Now it sounded foreign, almost hollow. I hovered in the hallway, listening, wondering how many of his words had been rehearsed, how many smiles had been covers. My heart clenched, but I stayed silent, the weight of my proof holding me in place. I could have confronted him right then, thrown the paper in his face. But no, that would have given him power. Instead, I let the anger settle like coals, glowing hotter the longer I held them. I went to the kitchen, moving quietly, like a ghost in my own home. I pulled out a glass of water, sipping slowly, steadying my hands. He called my name once, twice, but I didn't answer. Not yet, not until I was ready. Every movement, every breath felt deliberate, as though I was rehearsing for something bigger. And maybe I was, because this wasn't about catching him off guard, it was about control. And for the first time in a long time, I realized I had it. I sat at the kitchen table, the glass still in my hand, and stared at the smooth surface of the wood. For years, this table had been where we shared meals, where Daniel told me about his day, where I believed every word that left his mouth. Now, the memory of those conversations felt sour, like food left too long in the fridge. My hand slipped into my purse and touched the receipt again, the crumpled paper almost whispering to me, "You hold the truth, don't let it go." He walked into the room a few minutes later, smiling as if nothing in the world was wrong. He leaned down to kiss my cheek, and I let him, though every muscle in my body screamed against it. His touch, once comforting, felt like a mask I could finally see through. I studied his face as he spoke about something at work, nodding at the right moments, but inside, I was somewhere else. Inside, I was measuring him, his lies, his arrogance, his vulnerability. That was the moment I understood. Silence was my weapon. The longer I kept my secret, the more I could control the game. He didn't know I knew, and in that gap between his ignorance and my knowledge, I felt stronger than I had in years. The betrayal still stung, yes, but underneath it, something colder was forming. A plan. A decision. If he wanted to live two lives, then I would make sure he paid for every single breath of it. Later that night, I lay in bed beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. To anyone else, he looked peaceful, even innocent, but to me, he was a stranger wearing the skin of the man I'd once trusted. My fingers brushed against the receipt tucked under my pillow, as though keeping it close could anchor me. Every inhale he took felt like a lie whispered into the darkness. I turned my face to the ceiling, my body still, but my mind refused to rest. I thought about everything I'd lost over the years, the chance at children, the health battles that had carved strength into me, the quiet sacrifices that kept our life together. I had given Daniel loyalty, devotion, the best of me. And in return, he had chosen deceit. My heart ached, but alongside the ache came something sharper, cleaner, almost liberating. Anger. It pulsed steady, like a drumbeat in my veins, guiding me toward clarity. I realized I didn't need to scream, didn't need to beg him to choose me. That would only make me smaller, and I refused to shrink for his betrayal. No, I would wait. I would watch. And when the time came, I would place the truth before him in a way he couldn't escape. He thought he was clever, hiding pieces of his life from me. But I had the one thing that could tear down his perfect facade, and I intended to use it. Dinner that evening looked the same as every other night. The table was set, the clinking of silverware filled the silence, and Daniel sat across from me, chatting about work with that practiced ease he wore like a suit. But beneath it all, I could see the cracks, his nervous glance, the way he tapped his fork against the plate a second too long. Maybe he sensed something, maybe not. I didn't rush. I let him speak, nodding at all the right places, my heart steady as a drum. Halfway through the meal, I reached into my purse and placed the folded receipt on the table, right between us. His fork froze midair, his eyes darting to the paper as if it were a snake about to strike. I didn't say a word at first. I didn't need to. The silence was thick, pulling at him, daring him to look closer. Finally, I leaned back, watching as his color drained, the mask slipping just enough for me to see his fear. It was exactly what I wanted. He reached for it, fumbling, unfolding the paper like it might burn his fingers. His lips parted, some excuse ready to spill out, but I raised my hand, cutting him off before a sound left his throat. "Save it," I said calmly, my voice low but sharp enough to slice through the air. His eyes flickered, searching mine for softness, forgiveness, anything familiar. But what he found instead was steel. For the first time, he realized he wasn't the one in control anymore. He tried again, stumbling over words, his voice trembling as though he could still weave a story convincing enough to undo the truth written in ink. "It's not what you think," he muttered, his fork clattering against the plate. I almost laughed at the absurdity, but I kept my expression steady, letting the silence weigh heavier than any accusation. I had no interest in his lies, not anymore. They were as flimsy as tissue paper in a storm, and I refused to give them life. "I'm not leaving you," I said, my tone deliberate, each word chosen like a blade sharpened to precision. His eyes widened, confusion mixing with relief, though it didn't last long. "In fact," I continued, leaning forward, "you're staying right here." "On my terms?" The flicker of relief vanished, replaced by a panic he couldn't quite mask. For once it was him squirming, not me. That shift, that power, surged through me like a current I never knew I needed. I laid it out plainly, no theatrics, no raised voice, just cold, undeniable fact. "I have proof. One word from me and your family knows. Your boss knows. Everyone knows. You think this little secret of yours could be hidden? I can turn it into the headline of your life." His hand trembled as he reached for his glass of water, but even the simplest gesture betrayed him. He knew I wasn't bluffing. He knew I held his reputation in the palm of my hand, and I intended to keep it there. He sat there, pale and stiff, his shoulders hunched as if the weight of my words pressed down on him. I watched the sweat bead at his temple, the way his throat bobbed when he swallowed hard. "What do you want from me?" he whispered finally, his voice so thin it almost broke. That question was all the confirmation I needed. He wasn't in denial anymore. He wasn't even pretending. He was asking for his terms of surrender, and I was ready to deliver them. "You'll repay me," I said, steady and calm, like I was discussing the weather. "Not with apologies, those mean nothing. You'll repay me with loyalty, with obedience, with every ounce of effort you thought you could waste elsewhere." I leaned closer, locking my eyes on his. "You breathe by my permission now. Do you understand?" His lips trembled, but he nodded. Slowly, painfully, like each movement drained him. The silence that followed wasn't emptiness. It was power, mine, filling the room. That night, as he cleared the dishes without being asked, I felt the shift settle in. He thought he'd been clever, sneaking around, building a life outside of mine. But one slip, one careless purchase, had turned the tables entirely. The receipt stayed tucked safely in my drawer, not just as proof, but as leverage, a reminder that his freedom now belonged to me. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. My terms weren't punishment, they were a new way of life. The days that followed were almost surreal. Daniel moved through the house like a man afraid of his own shadow. His words were measured, his gestures cautious, as though every move might trigger the truth I kept locked away. I didn't need to shout or remind him. My silence did all the work. He cooked dinner without being asked, checked in constantly, and even his laughter sounded nervous, clipped short, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to enjoy it. And I let him live like that, one careful step at a time. I carried myself differently too. Where once I might have second-guessed or softened my words, now I spoke with certainty, as though I had been waiting my whole life for this moment. In a way, I had. Years of loyalty, sacrifice, and blind faith had led to this. Me, sitting at the head of the table without ever needing to announce it. I didn't tell him what I'd do with the receipt if he slipped again. I didn't need to. The fear in his eyes told me he imagined every possible outcome. At night, I would watch him from across the room, the man who had once betrayed me now tethered by a single piece of paper. Sometimes I wondered if he hated me for it. But the truth was, I didn't care. For the first time, he was the one living with uncertainty, not me. And there was a strange, almost intoxicating satisfaction in that reversal. I had been broken, yes, but I had rebuilt myself into something sharper. And he was learning that lesson, day by day. Sometimes I'd catch him glancing at me, eyes darting away quickly, as if he was terrified of what he might see written on my face. It amused me, really. For years, I had been the one seeking reassurance, waiting for signs of affection, for proof that I mattered. Now he was the one searching, desperate for crumbs of approval. I gave them sparingly, like a queen deciding when to nod to her servant. And each time I saw his shoulders drop in relief, knowing I still held his secret. The receipt stayed tucked away in the top drawer of my nightstand, folded neatly, waiting like a blade wrapped in silk. I'd open the drawer sometimes, just to glance at it, and each time, the sight of those printed words reminded me of the shift that had taken place. It wasn't just a slip of paper, it was my armor, my leverage, my victory. Daniel didn't dare ask about it. He didn't dare touch it. And that silence between us grew louder than any confrontation ever could. Life outside our home carried on as if nothing had changed. Friends invited us to dinners, family asked about vacations, and everyone still called us the perfect couple. I smiled more now, not because I was happy in the old sense, but because I knew something they didn't. I knew that beneath Daniel's polished charm, he was crumbling, and I was the one holding him together, not out of love, but out of power. That secret was mine alone, and I carried it with a quiet satisfaction. At night, when the house was still, I sometimes opened the drawer and let my fingers rest on the folded receipt. It felt fragile, thin, yet it carried more weight than anything Daniel could ever say to me. I would unfold it slowly, my eyes tracing each line until they landed on the one that had changed everything. Pregnancy test kit, just 4 simple words. But to me, they weren't just proof of betrayal. They were the chains now wrapped around him, the crown now resting on me. I'd lean back, holding the paper against the dim glow of the lamp, and let a small smile tug at my lips. Daniel thought he'd taken something from me, thought he'd built a secret life beyond my reach. Instead, he'd handed me the very weapon that kept him tethered. Every time he rushed to answer a question, every time he stumbled over a lie, every time his eyes begged for mercy, it reminded me that he was the one cornered now, not me. Never me again. One night, after slipping the paper back into its place, I whispered into the silence, "One little piece of paper, and now he begs to stay." The words rolled off my tongue like a vow, a reminder of just how far I'd come. I turned off the light, slid beneath the covers, and listened to the quiet sound of his breathing beside me. He had no idea how close his world sat to collapse. And that knowledge, my secret, my power, was enough to make me smile in the dark.